Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte, and in this video I will be giving you my review and analysis of Loki episode 2. So obviously there will be spoilers for Loki episode 2. I will keep theories about future episodes for the end of the video, so if you don't want to hear any theories, you can stop at the end and skip that part. So I really loved the episode. Again, it was very different from episode 1, but it was still great. And I will talk about 3 things in particular. The first one was the change in tone between episode 1 and episode 2, which was quite noticeable, but I enjoyed it actually. The second one is the evolution of the Mobius-Loki relationship. And the third one is the deeper dive into the philosophical questions that they had already begun to talk about in episode 1, about free will, freedom, identity, and order versus chaos, of course. So first, let's start with the change in tone. I really loved episode 1 and the mixed tone that it had. It started with comedy and then gradually descending into outright tragedy, in fact, with, this very emotional scene when Loki had to confront his future, the death of his mother, his own responsibility in it, and his own death, of course. And Mobius basically forcing him to do some introspection and leading him to have a real breakdown, in fact, and a kind of existential crisis. And I said in my previous video that I expected a drastic change in tone for this second episode. And this is exactly what we got, in fact. If episode 1 was about Loki's confusion and introspection and existential crisis, this one was just 100% chaotic energy. It was just much faster in pace, much more talky as well than the first one. I know some critics said episode 1 was too talky, but I wonder if they did not kind of mix up the first 2 episodes because they saw both for the press, the people who were lucky enough to see both episodes, because this one seemed to have a lot more dialogue, in fact, than the first one. But it also had a lot more action, so it was just generally much more hectic, much more energetic than the first one. I did not mind the amount of dialogue personally, because I think Mobius and Loki made a delightful pair. They're very entertaining, so I don't mind that there's a lot of dialogue. I really like the fact that Loki still had this kind of contradictory attitude to the TVA and the work that he has to do for them now. You can see that he's acting like he's bored, like he's slacking, he's not really watching the videos, he's just bickering with Miss Minutes instead of doing the work. But in fact, you can tell he's actually enjoying it once he gets into it. And he's also very good at it. His curiosity, his very sharp intellect and his ability to think outside the box, they are actually perfect for the work that he's given. Also, I really like the fact that his mercurial nature is particularly evident. You can see, for example, that scene was maybe the one emotional scene in this episode when he's looking at the files that describe Ragnarok. So basically the end of Asgard, the death of most of the people of Asgard, total planetary destruction, as it says in the file. So something that is quite difficult to read, and you can see that he's tearing up, so he is visibly moved by this. And yet 5 minutes later, when he goes to Mobius with his discovery that the variant likes to hide in the apocalypse, he's so excited that he doesn't seem to care anymore. When Mobius said, "Oh yes, the destruction of Asgard, I'm sorry," and he just goes, "Oh yes, very sad." But it got me thinking, and then his brain, his super efficient brain, is just fired up by the thrill of having found an answer to this question, to the enigma, and also probably of proving his worth to Mobius. So it really shows that he's probably sincere in both scenes, but his mood can change drastically from actually feeling something for all the people of Asgard and the fact that his civilization was destroyed, but then 5 minutes later, he seems like he doesn't really care, in fact. So Loki clearly thrives in chaos, and obviously he's really as happy as a child in Disneyland when he gets to travel to Pompeii and be in the middle of the eruption. So that was really fun to watch. Then another thing that I really liked was the evolution of the Mobius-Loki relationship. And in particular, what struck me during this episode was the symmetry in this relationship. It is very clear that Loki still despises the TVA and what they do, even though now he's aware of their power. He doesn't even try to hide this from Mobius. He just keeps calling them idiots and so on. He mocks the timekeepers constantly. And what's really interesting is this conversation in which he seems to tell Mobius that he's actually too good for the TVA. When he tells him, every time I start to respect your intelligence, you say something like this. It's really interesting because it mirrors Mobius's remark to Loki in the first episode when he told him, why does someone with so much range only want to rule? It's really the same kind of remark. They both have genuine respect for the other guy's intelligence, but they also seem to struggle to understand why the other puts his intelligence in the service of goals that they find silly, in fact. Another thing is that Mobius is a lot more open in this episode about the fact that he's using Loki. And I found that interesting. In the first episode, he tried to act very sympathetically. Sometimes also he pushed him to admit a number of things, but he was trying at least to show that he cared. And here, he's kind of more cynical. He very plainly tells him that he is planning to use his insecurities to manipulate him. And he also acts in a rather detached manner when he tells him, I don't care what makes you tick. Or when he's talking to Judge Rainslayer and he tells her, if it doesn't work, I'll delete him myself. Though in this case, he could also be pretending to be detached, because I think he wants to insist that he knows what he's doing, that he's in control. So the last thing he wants is for Renslayer to see that maybe he's got a certain attachment or fascination for Loki. So in this case, it probably has to be taken with a pinch of salt, this assertion that he wouldn't mind deleting the Loki variant if it doesn't work. And this relationship is quite fascinating because we never really know how genuine it is. Mobius tells Loki this.
I'll give you two options. You can believe whichever one you want. A, because I see a scared little boy shivering in the cold, and you kind of feel bad for that ice runt. Or B, I just want to catch this guy, and I'll tell you whatever I need to tell you.
So he's basically telling him he can choose to believe what he wants. I have sympathy for you, or I don't care about you and I'm just using you to get to my own ends. But of course, we know the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And the longer this relationship will last, the harder it will be to draw this boundary. I'm pretty sure this is where it's going. And the same is true of Loki, of course. At the moment, we know he's very willing to betray Mobius, but clearly Mobius is also giving him a kind of validation that he has never had from anyone else in his life, including his father and his brother, except maybe from his mother. That might be the only person who actually validated him as an intelligent person and a capable person. But his father and brother definitely never gave him that validation. So no matter what he says, we know he does crave this. And no matter how much Mobius likes to tease him about not being the superior Loki or just being a pussycat and not a real villain, he does validate him again and again by praising his intelligence repeatedly, in fact, throughout this episode. So I really like this kind of uncertain nature of the relationship. You don't really know how cynical it really is, how genuine their friendship might be. Will it turn into an actual friendship? It's a bit of a Bronn and Tyrion relationship, in my opinion. The fact that they're both quite open about using one another, that basically they're not really friends, but they just need each other for very pragmatic reasons. So they're acting quite cynical, pretending not to really care and to just be manipulating the other. But you can see, or at least you wonder, how honest they're being when they're saying that. Do they actually not care at all about each other? I don't think so. I don't think they're so detached. I don't think they're as detached as they're pretending to be. And I'm pretty sure that they will grow attached to one another, and there will be a point where betrayal will become difficult, actually. More difficult than they think, probably. And the most interesting thing maybe about Mobius and Loki in this episode is that they are in fact very similar. I was saying earlier that Loki's remark to Mobius about his being too good for the TVA in a way was it mirrored a similar remark that Mobius made to Loki in the first episode. But there are other parallels. Both have very quick and inquisitive minds. There's this moment when Mobius tells Loki he's going to take his job if he's not careful, so he recognizes this. Loki would make a very good analyst, in fact. Both have a tendency to think outside the box as well and bend the rules. Loki, for obvious reasons, because he represents chaos. But even Mobius, he may work for an organization that is obsessed with order and rules, but you can see that he's a bit of a maverick. He, when he talks to Judge Renslayer, you can see he's seen as a bit of an eccentric worker, someone who doesn't really stick to the rules. His experiment with the Loki variant is seen as something weird and dangerous. So he's also a bit of a maverick. And finally, of course, both are professional liars and manipulators. Loki is the god of mischief, but also of lies and illusions. And Mobius is a master interrogator, and he knows exactly how to manipulate people by telling them what they want to hear. And both insist that they're very good listeners as well. You had this passage where when Loki talks about wolves' teeth and wolves' ears, and insisted that in fact his ears were far more useful than teeth, because he could get a lot from the people in Asgard by listening. And Mobius also insists at one point that he's also very good at listening and telling truth from lies. So this is very interesting. They're actually very similar. So it's not very surprising that they make such a great duo. Now, another interesting aspect of this relationship in this episode was that they went even deeper into conversations about identity, free will, chaos, and order. Well, what I found very interesting in the conversation Loki and Mobius have in the cafeteria, I guess it's a cafeteria, is that you almost feel like now it is no longer Mobius trying to get Loki to reassess his purpose in life, but it's the opposite. Loki is questioning Mobius's motivations and forcing him to think about why he's working for the TVA and whether their goal, the TVA's goal, is in fact a noble one. Clearly, Loki is not keen on the idea of bringing order to everything because he loves chaos and he finds order boring. But given what I said earlier about Mobius, I'm wondering if Loki isn't going to push him to question the TVA, in fact. And that would be a very interesting reversal of their roles. You can already tell that Mobius is a bit eccentric and probably too clever for to swallow the propaganda of the TVA. So that might be interesting. And also Loki makes a very good point when he suggests that, in fact, if the TVA decides everything for everyone, then the people working at the TVA are the only ones who are truly free. At least the timekeepers are, because they get to make decisions, and they're the only ones who get to make decisions in this scenario. So that's a very good point, and one that might actually convince Mobius to question the TVA. Now, regarding the question of free will and identity, there was another very interesting conversation, which was the one between Mobius and Judge Renslayer about the Loki variant. When confronted with Renslayer's assertion that their first mission had been botched, that it had been a failure, Mobius actually responded and reacted by saying it was not a failure because it had made him discover something about the Loki variant, namely that he likes to store for time. And the interesting thing is, Mobius was trying to argue that if this is true of this Loki variant, then it must be true of the other Loki variants as well. That's interesting because it raises an important question, which is there a sort of invariant or an essence or a sort of core identity that remains in all of the Loki variants? It harks back to this question of identity and of what makes Loki Loki. this phrase that they love to use in the promo and the interviews. So is there a kind of core identity that remains, even though all the variants are different and they have lived through different experiences as well? So again, what makes you you? Is it what you live through, or do you have a kind of core identity that remains the same no matter what? That's very deep, actually. There was also another allusion to the same idea that they alluded in the first episode, which is that Loki has been designed to play the same part over and over again, and that he might want to break out of this cycle. And this, again, reminds me of Agent of Asgard, because this is the main plot in Agent of Asgard, the way that Loki tries to escape this destiny of always ending up, the villain. And it left me wondering also about the relationship between this Loki variant, the main Loki variant, the one we're following, and the other variants. There was this fact that the assassin, I will call this, the lady that we see at the end, the assassin, left all these clues for the Loki variant to find her. Apparently, she wanted him to find her. She used this scared little boy in the church, which was clearly a reference to this idea that Loki himself was a scared little boy. That was very intriguing. Does that mean that she knows that this idea of the scared little boy resonates with every other Loki variant? Leaving the kablooey was a way to lead him to her. So clearly the assassin wanted to be found and was manipulating the other Loki. At least that's how I understood it. But what does that mean in terms of the relationship between the various variants? It's still a big mystery to me, to be honest. So before I move on to theories, just a few quick fire remarks. Sleeping Loki is really cute. And also it shows how comfortable he feels around Mobius. Michael Waldron, if we do not see Mobius on the jet ski at some point, we will feel betrayed. Some of the variants we saw got me really excited. Jotun Loki. Loki winning the Tour de France. Okay, I don't know if we will actually see this. And Viking Loki as well. So I do hope we will see some of this. At least Jotun Loki and Viking Loki would be really cool. Loki's hair getting completely messed up whenever he fights is a nice change from the wigs. You can tell this is real hair, and it's nice. Also, I love the fact that they filmed this in front of the hair product aisle. That was hilarious. I'm sure it was deliberate. I'm sure it was a nod to the fans and the running gag, the running jokes about Loki's greasy hair. Not much magic so far. I expected more. We only saw the two things we had already seen, Loki drying his clothes and Loki using telekinesis to grab a Roomba to fight with. But I'm sure more is to come. And finally, Professor Loki, your Tom Hiddleston is showing. You can really tell that Professor Loki is really Professor Tom, and they just integrated that into the script, and apparently that has been confirmed. And it's just really funny to see how Loki explains stuff with his hands exactly in the same way as Tom Hiddleston. So clearly there is more of Tom in Loki than he likes to admit. Now, theories on what is to come in the next episodes. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels there's something shady going on with the TVA. Renslayer's very brisk manners seem to be hiding some kind of secret, which could be maybe that the timekeepers don't exist. Mobius says he has never met them. No one really seems to have met them or to truly know what they're really doing. This is all very suspicious. And with the very propagandish nature of the TVA, I wouldn't be surprised if there was something more sinister at play behind the scenes. And these timekeepers ended up being just a fable to cover that up. And now, until the big reveal at the end of the episode. In my previous videos, I mentioned that I was hoping that Sofia Di Martino's character would turn out not to be a Loki variant, but would be the Enchantress, in fact. And in my video about episode 1, I was preparing myself for my theory to be disproved after the revelation at the end of the episode that the mysterious hooded assassin the TVA was chasing was, in fact, another Loki. And well, after seeing this episode, in fact, I am not at all convinced that she's truly a Loki variant. If anything, I'm even more convinced that she's not Loki. the conversation between the main Loki variant and the hooded assassin, or the people that she enchanted and that she used to speak to the other Loki, it was all very confusing, this conversation. On the one hand, it is true that the assassin does use magic, green magic, like Loki. And she told Loki, if anyone's anyone, you're me. So this is a bit weird, but this seems to confirm that they're both Lokis. But on the other hand, there were a few things that made me doubt that the assassin was really a Loki variant. There was Loki's funny remark when he was fighting her, I would never treat me like this. So that may have been a clue. There's the fact that the assassin rejected the name Loki by saying, no, my name is Randy. That could just be a way to kind of playful way of making fun of the other Loki, so I'm not sure if that means anything. But most of all, the final line was very mysterious. This isn't about you. What does that mean then? If it's not about him, if it's not about Loki, if that was a Loki variant talking to another Loki variant, would they really say, this isn't about you? Also, the horns that she's wearing look more like a costume than a real outfit. It seems very on the nose, as if she was deliberately trying to make people think she's Loki. Now, I did wonder how the TVA had identified this variant as Loki, and they mentioned temporal aura. Could she have faked it? I don't know. I don't know how these things work, so maybe. And maybe she's also in cahoots with another Loki variant. That's another possibility. If she is in fact Sylvie Laufeydottir, as I think she is, if you check out Sylvie Laufeydottir, you will see that she was actually created by Loki. She was given powers by Loki. So it would make sense for her to use green magic the same way as Loki does, and maybe to be manipulated by another Loki. So, in other words, I'm not ready to join all the people who seem to have already jumped on the Lady Loki bandwagon. And in addition to this, when it comes to the question of Loki being gender fluid or sex fluid, because in his case, he can also actually change his shape. He's a shapeshifter. So it's not just gender. He can actually change sex as well. I've noted that people often seem to confuse two different things, or to focus only on one and forget about the other. There is a Lady Loki character in the Thor comics, which I haven't read, I have to say, but I do know that there is a Lady Loki character. And in that comic, Lady Loki is actually Loki who has taken over the body of Lady Sif. So that's not really gender fluidity. This is much closer to possession. He took her body. He reincarnated in a body that was meant for her and not for him. So yes, Loki's soul is in a female body, but it's somebody else's body, and it's also a temporary thing, and he goes back to his male form later, as I understand. So this makes it very different from the other depiction of Loki in female form, which is in Agent of Asgard. And in Agent of Asgard, Loki is truly gender fluid and just shifts back and forth between a male and female appearance, which supposedly reflects how he feels at that time. And this is much closer to both sex and gender fluidity. And it makes it much clearer that these two Lokis, they're actually one Loki. They're not two different characters. It's not a variant. It's not an alternative reality Loki. It's just Loki himself, or herself, or themselves. And you can also note that the helmet with one broken horn that she's wearing is taken directly from Agent of Asgard. So I'm thinking, really, this is the source that they have drawn the most inspiration from. Agent of Asgard is really about identity, about, you've got Kid Loki, you've got Old Loki, you've got Loki being gender fluid. All these elements seem to be really present in the series. I think much of the inspiration was drawn from this specific series of comics. Now, I still do think that Loki will appear in a female body, but I do not think it will be Sofia Di Martino. I think it might be Loki truly being gender fluid and also shape-shifting into a female incarnation. And I think the actress might be Jamie Alexander for several reasons. One, it would be a reference to the comics in which Loki takes Sif's body, because Jamie Alexander played Sif. And she would match Loki's appearance, unlike Sofia Di Martino, because why on earth would you choose a blonde actress to play Loki? Loki is never depicted as blonde. Loki always has dark hair. 2, it would also be the realization of what Tom Hiddleston said in an old interview, in which he said that if Loki was to appear in a female body, he thought Jamie Alexander would be the perfect choice. So he might have argued in favor of this, and maybe he convinced the other people working on the series to cast Jamie Alexander. 3, there were rumors of Jamie Alexander being in Atlanta while the series was being filmed. And finally, I think it would be a great twist, with most people already thinking that everything has been revealed in episodes 1 and 2 and prematurely pronouncing Sofia Di Martino to be Loki. I think they may not have revealed all their cards so soon, and maybe they still have surprises in store for us. And one of these surprises could be that we thought we had identified Sofia Di Martino as a Loki variant, and in fact she might be the Enchantress. Now, another thing I want to add, because it was discovered after I filmed this video, is this screenshot that was made of a file that Loki consults at the TVA. The file says Sylvie Laufeydottir. This of course created more debate about whether the assassin was not in fact Sylvie Laufeydottir. But the fact that they called her Laufeydottir surprised many people. Some initially believed it might mean she was Loki's sister, but it is more likely that this is simply because she's considered to be a Loki variant, and therefore a child of Laufey. In the same way that Loki is Laufeyson, a female Loki variant would be Laufeydottir. However, I do not agree that this file confirms that the assassin is truly a Loki variant. I believe it only shows that this is what the TVA believe. We have already seen that TVA files are not reliable sources. A first file about the main Loki variant was shown in a promo, and then a different file appeared in episode 1. If you look closely, there have been changes between the two files. Loki's height has been adjusted from 6'4" to 6'2", which is Tom Hiddleston's real height, and his ethnicity has been added as well, Frost Giant. And they did not know his date of birth, so they do not know everything. So this shows that TVA files are adjusted with time, and they only represent what the TVA think they know about the variant, nothing more. Besides this file Loki is consulting is only an incident report. It is not the file of a variant that has been apprehended and maybe measured, analyzed, whatever. Therefore, the information might be only based on one sighting of this Loki variant. If the variant was pretending to be Loki, wearing the horns and the costume, the TVA might have been fooled. In any case, they clearly did not know that she was the assassin they were looking for. Otherwise, they would have said so during the briefing, when they went looking for her, with Loki. So my theory remains the same. I believe this variant is Sylvie the Enchantress, and that she has successfully deceived the TVA into believing that she is a Loki variant. So all in all, it was another great episode. It was very different in tone and pace from the first one, but the change was welcome. I loved the first one, but I also loved the second one, and I loved that the tone was different. All the great stuff about the first episode was still there. The great world building, the comedy, the great dynamic between Mobius and Loki. The acting was amazing on all parts. Now, Loki decided to follow the other variant, so we'll see how Mobius reacts to this. He will probably feel betrayed, but was it really a betrayal? I don't think so. I think it will be more complicated than this. But he will have to justify himself when he goes back to the TVA and Loki has run away. So it will be interesting to see the fallout. Will he lose his job? Will he, will his career be damaged? Will his relationship with Loki change completely as a result of this? We'll just have to wait and see. So I'll see you next week for episode 3. Bye bye.